The Locked Cabin, A Broken Childhood, and the Birth of a Star. For 3 decades, Michael Landon's secret cabin sat locked and forgotten, hidden deep in the woods, its windows choked by vines and its door sealed like a tomb. Locals whispered about it in hushed tones, imagining what might lie inside. Old props, uncashed checks, maybe even scandalous evidence of the private life of one of television's biggest icons. For years, the cabin was nothing more than a rumor, a mystery overshadowed by Landon's larger-than-life image on screen. But when the key was finally found decades after his death, the truth stunned everyone. Inside, the dust-covered shelves still held his belongings. Faded photographs, handwritten letters, and personal items had been left untouched, as though time itself had frozen the day he last locked the door. Some of those letters spoke of regrets and fears he never admitted publicly, loneliness at the height of his fame, pressures he carried in silence, and scars from his childhood that never healed. It was as though the cabin had become a silent confessional, the one place where Michael Landon could set down the burdens he carried in private. To understand the mystery of that cabin is to understand Michael Landon himself. Because behind the heroic father figures he played on television, behind the smile and the charisma, lay a man forged in pain. The boy named Eugene Michael Landon was not born into Hollywood glamour. He entered the world as Eugene Maurice Orowitz on October 31, 1936, in Forest Hills, Queens. His family was a mix of Jewish and Irish Catholic backgrounds, a cultural clash that shaped his early years. His father, Eli Maurice Orowitz, was Jewish. His mother, Kathleen Peggy O'Neill, was Irish Catholic, the union of 2 very different traditions in an era when anti-Semitism and cultural divides were rampant, left young Eugene feeling caught between worlds. In 1941, the family moved to Collingswood, New Jersey. There, they became one of the very few Jewish families in the community, and Eugene soon learned what it meant to stand out for the wrong reasons. After his bar mitzvah, he was singled out for ridicule. Cruel remarks from peers and the sting of prejudice etched themselves into his memory. But the deepest wounds did not come from the outside world. They came from within his own home. A mother's darkness, Michael's mother, Peggy, battled severe emotional instability. Her mood swings and attempts at suicide cast long shadows over the household. One of the most haunting memories of Michael's childhood was the day she tried to drown herself in the ocean during a family beach trip. She walked into the water, determined not to return. It was young Michael, still just a child, who rushed after her, pulling her back to shore, dragging her toward life when she seemed ready to surrender to death. The trauma of that day never left him. It planted in him a fear of losing her, but also a heavy responsibility, a child forced into the role of protector long before he was ready for it. The emotional scars deepened with another childhood struggle, bedwetting. Landon suffered from it well past the age when most children outgrow the condition. Instead of comforting him, his mother chose humiliation as her weapon. She hung his wet sheets outside the window for neighbors to see, exposing his shame to the world. It was a cruelty that left him feeling broken, powerless, and stripped of dignity. But in that pain lay the seeds of the artist he would become. Years later, Landon transformed this private humiliation into his semi-autobiographical TV film, The Loneliest Runner. The story of a boy whose mother hangs his wet sheets outside for all to see struck audiences as raw and deeply human. It was Landon's way of reclaiming the shame, turning it into art that connected with countless others carrying secret burdens. Athletics as escape. Despite the darkness at home, Landon found refuge in athletics. Sports became his escape, a way to prove to himself that he was more than his shame. At Collingswood High School, he discovered a talent for the javelin throw. What began as an outlet for anger and energy soon became a source of pride. In 1954, he achieved what seemed impossible. His throw was recorded as the longest by any high school athlete in the United States that year. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just Eugene Orowitz, the boy from a troubled home. He was someone admired, someone with potential, someone who might even make it to the Olympics. But fate intervened. A shoulder injury abruptly ended his athletic dreams. For a young man who had invested so much of his identity in sports, it was devastating. Yet it was also the turning point that forced him onto a different path, the path that would eventually lead to Hollywood. From Eugene Orowitz to Michael Landon, with athletics gone, Landon turned his restless energy toward performance. He dabbled in acting, first in small community roles, then in auditions that pulled him closer to the entertainment industry. But there was one problem. Eugene Maurice Orowitz wasn't a name that Hollywood would embrace. He first tried Michael Lane, but when he learned another actor already had the name, he searched for something else. The story goes that he flipped through a phone book, scanning for names beginning with the letter L. He landed on Landon, paired it with Michael, and became the man America would one day know as Michael Landon. It was more than a stage name. It was a rebirth. He shed the identity of the humiliated child and the failed athlete, stepping into a persona that carried strength, confidence, and charisma. The first breakthrough, Michael's early years in Hollywood were filled with small roles, often uncredited. He worked hard to prove himself, often balancing odd jobs with auditions. His break came in 1957 when he landed the lead role in the B-movie I Was a Teenage Werewolf. The film wasn't high art, it was a horror flick designed to capture the teenage market, but it became a hit. Landon's performance, filled with both vulnerability and raw energy, made him stand out. Young audiences loved him, and Hollywood began to take notice. For Landon, Teenage Werewolf was more than a paycheck. It was proof that he could command a screen, that the charisma he felt inside could translate to audiences everywhere. But he wasn't satisfied with being just another face in a forgettable B-movie. He wanted more depth, more control, more meaning. A student of television, the late 1950s and early 1960s were a golden age of television westerns, and Landon's rugged looks and intense presence made him a natural fit. He landed guest roles in various series, honing his craft and studying how television worked. Behind the scenes, Landon was a student. He watched directors closely, studied scripts, and paid attention to how producers shaped stories. Even then, he was preparing himself not just to act, but to write, direct, and one day control his own destiny in Hollywood. That destiny came calling in 1959 when he was cast as Little Joe Cartwright on the NBC Western Bonanza. It was the role that would change his life forever. The roots of his strength. Looking back, the boy who had once been humiliated and broken seemed an unlikely candidate to become one of America's most beloved television figures. But those wounds were exactly what gave Landon his depth. The pain of his mother's instability, the trauma of nearly losing her, the shame of his bedwetting, the sting of prejudice. All of it became fuel. It gave him empathy, allowing him to portray characters with vulnerability beneath their strength. It gave him determination, the drive to succeed no matter what, and it gave him an understanding of secrets and silence, themes that would echo throughout his work and even in the private mystery of his locked cabin decades later. Michael Landon had transformed himself from Eugene Orowitz, the humiliated boy, into Michael Landon, the actor on the brink of stardom. But the story was just beginning, because the boy who had escaped through athletics and clawed his way into Hollywood was about to become part of television royalty. And once he reached the Ponderosa Ranch on Bonanza, Michael Landon would no longer just be another actor. He would become a star whose influence stretched far beyond the screen. Bonanza. By the late 1950s, Michael Landon's life had already shifted dramatically. The boy once weighed down by childhood shame was now stepping into Hollywood. In 1959, at just 22 years old, he landed the role that would make him a household name, Little Joe Cartwright on NBC's Bonanza. At first, it seemed like just another acting gig in a world filled with westerns. Nobody, not even Landon himself, could have predicted it would transform him into one of the biggest stars of his generation. Life on the Ponderosa Bonanza told the story of Ben Cartwright and his 3 sons running the Ponderosa Ranch in Nevada. The show was a western, but it was different from others of its time. It wasn't just about shootouts and cowboy heroics. It focused on family bonds, morality, and human struggles, themes that resonated with audiences on a deeper level. Landon's character, Little Joe, was the youngest of the Cartwright brothers. With his boyish charm, fiery temper, and emotional depth, Little Joe quickly became a fan favorite. Women adored him, children saw him as relatable, and men respected his spirit. His popularity soared, and for the next 14 years, Landon would be one of the anchors of one of television's longest-running and most beloved shows. But Landon wasn't satisfied with just being an actor. During his years on the Ponderosa, he spent as much time behind the camera as he did in front of it. He studied scripts, shadowed directors, and began writing episodes himself. His episodes often focused on morality, redemption, and family, values he desperately wanted to reinforce, both for audiences and for himself. By the mid-1960s, Landon had stepped into directing, adding his personal stamp to the show. His leadership style was demanding, sometimes to the point of friction, but he refused to settle for mediocrity. He wanted stories that mattered, the death of a co-star and the end of an era. In 1972, tragedy struck. Dan Blocker, who played Hoss Cartwright, died suddenly from a pulmonary embolism after gallbladder surgery. Blocker's death devastated both the cast and the fans. Without Hoss, the chemistry of the Cartwright family was broken. Ratings slipped, and by 1973, after an incredible 14-season run, Bonanza came to an end. For Landon, the end of Bonanza was bittersweet. He had grown up on the Ponderosa, learned his craft, and built a reputation as more than just an actor, but now he was ready for something bigger. He had the skills, the experience, and the vision to create a show of his own. Little House on the Prairie, building a new legacy. In 1974, Michael Landon launched his greatest triumph, Little House on the Prairie. He didn't just star in the series as Charles Ingalls, the devoted father of a pioneer family. He also served as writer, director, and producer, shaping the show from top to bottom. The role of Charles Ingalls seemed tailor-made for him. Strong, compassionate, moral, a father who guided his family with patience and love. To millions of viewers, Landon was more than an actor. He became America's father figure, the man they wished they had at home. But Little House wasn't just wholesome entertainment. Landon insisted the show tackled tough subjects rarely addressed on family television at the time: racism, addiction, child abuse, poverty, and death. Under his guidance, the series balanced warmth with seriousness, teaching lessons while also entertaining. Week after week, families across America gathered around their televisions, not just to be entertained, but to feel something deeper. They laughed, cried, and learned through the Ingalls family. Landon had succeeded in creating not just a show, but a cultural touchstone: the shadows behind the camera. While Landon was celebrated on screen, his role behind the scenes was more complicated. He demanded perfection, sometimes pushing cast and crew to their limits. His leadership could inspire, but it could also intimidate. Some co-stars adored him for his guidance, while others found him controlling. Then came the scandal that cracked his carefully crafted image. During Little House, Landon began an affair with Cindy Clerico, a young makeup artist on set. She was only 18 when they met. At the time, Landon was still married to Lynn Noe, with whom he had 9 children, both biological and adopted. When the affair became public, the fallout was brutal. Lynn filed for divorce in 1982 after nearly 20 years of marriage. The family Landon had built with her fractured overnight. For fans, reconciling the virtuous Charles Ingalls with the real-life Landon's choices was difficult. On set, the tension was palpable. Co-star Karen Grassel, Caroline Ingalls, later spoke about how uncomfortable the atmosphere became once the affair was out in the open. Melissa Gilbert, who had viewed Landon as a father figure, was heartbroken. Their once close relationship was shattered, and though they reconciled somewhat before his death, the bond never fully healed. Despite the scandal, Landon stood by his decision. He married Cindy Clerico in 1983, and the couple went on to have 2 children together. But the affair permanently altered the public perception of Michael Landon. Highway to Heaven, A Search for Redemption. After Little House on the Prairie ended in 1983, Landon wasted no time in creating his next project. In 1984, he launched Highway to Heaven, playing Jonathan Smith, an angel sent to Earth to help those in need. If Little House was about family, Highway to Heaven was about faith, redemption, and hope. Every episode featured Jonathan and his companion, Mark Gordon, played by Victor French, traveling from town to town, helping people overcome hardship. For many, the show reflected Landon's personal search for peace. He had lived through a painful childhood, carried the scars of a scandal, and was still grappling with the complexities of his personal life. Through Jonathan Smith, Landon projected his longing for redemption and his belief in the possibility of goodness. Highway to Heaven became another success, running for 5 seasons and winning over audiences with its blend of spirituality and heart. But behind the scenes, Landon's life was still filled with contradictions. He was admired as a leader, yet criticized as a perfectionist. He played a loving father and angel on screen, yet his personal relationships remained scarred by choices that left wounds on those closest to him. The burden of perfection. By the mid-1980s, Michael Landon had achieved what few in Hollywood ever do: 3 back-to-back iconic shows, each leaving a permanent mark on television history. He was a star, a creator, a producer, and to many, a moral voice of the small screen. But carrying that image came with a burden. Landon's childhood traumas never fully left him. The humiliation, the pain, the shame, they lived inside him, even as he smiled for the cameras. His relentless work ethic, his perfectionism, and his insistence on control all traced back to that boy who never wanted to feel powerless again. The locked cabin he would one day leave behind, filled with private letters and belongings, symbolized this duality. On the outside, Michael Landon was the strong, smiling patriarch. On the inside, he was still carrying wounds he rarely allowed anyone to see. A legacy in progress. By the late 1980s, Landon had firmly established himself as television royalty. Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, and Highway to Heaven weren't just shows. They were cultural landmarks. He had gone from Eugene Orowitz, the humiliated boy, to Michael Landon, one of the most beloved figures in American entertainment. But the story wasn't finished, because in 1991, life dealt him the cruelest hand of all, a diagnosis that would end his career and his life far too soon. Before that final chapter, however, the man who had given the world stories of love, faith, and family would have to confront his own mortality, and in doing so, remind us of the fragility of even the brightest stars. Illness, final days, and the secrets the cabin revealed. By the early 1990s, Michael Landon had spent 3 decades at the top of television. He had starred in and shaped some of the most beloved shows of all time: Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, Highway to Heaven. He was America's favorite son, father, and angel, all rolled into one. But behind the scenes, his personal life was fragile. His affair with Cindy Clerico had cost him friendships, strained his bond with castmates, and altered the way fans viewed him. Yet he carried on, convinced that he could balance it all: his career, his family, and his reputation. Then, in the spring of 1991, life delivered the one blow he couldn't outwork, outfight, or outcreate: pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis that changed everything. While vacationing in Utah, Landon was hit with a piercing headache that refused to go away. Soon after, doctors gave him devastating news. The cancer had spread too far for surgery. His chances were slim to none. At just 54 years old, the man who seemed larger than life was suddenly face to face with mortality. The diagnosis rocked Hollywood. Fans, co-stars, and journalists alike were stunned. Michael Landon had always seemed invincible, strong, confident, smiling. Now, the reality was stark. He was dying. At first, Landon tried to fight with everything he had. He began chemotherapy but quickly found the side effects unbearable. He turned instead to holistic treatments, seeking comfort in alternative therapies. His daughter Leslie later admitted that her father had long ignored his health. He dismissed symptoms, avoided checkups, and brushed aside the warning signs his body had been sending. By the time he sought help, it was already too late. Facing death with dignity, or as his health declined, Landon carried himself with a quiet dignity that moved those around him. Friends and family later recalled that he refused to wallow in self-pity. He chose to face death on his own terms, with courage and even humor. In interviews during his final months, he spoke candidly about his illness, his family, and his determination to remain strong for his children. "I don't want anybody to be sad for me," he said in one of his last appearances. "I've had a wonderful life. I want people to smile when they think of me." But behind the brave words was a man still grappling with regrets. He had mended fences with some, like Melissa Gilbert, but others still carried wounds from his choices. He knew that his public image as the perfect father didn't always align with the reality of his personal life. Yet, In those final months, Landon seemed determined to leave behind a memory of strength rather than sorrow. July 1st, 1991, the final goodbye. On July 1st, 1991, Michael Landon died at his Malibu home, surrounded by his family. He was just 54 years old. The news broke hearts around the world. Fans mourned the loss of the man who had given them Little Joe, Charles Ingalls, and Jonathan Smith. Colleagues remembered his brilliance, his drive, and his relentless pursuit of excellence. The grief was immense. Landon had not only entertained millions, he had shaped their lives with stories of family, morality, and hope. Television and America itself felt emptier without him. The locked cabin. After his death, Michael Landon's Malibu home became the center of remembrance. But far from the spotlight, deep in the woods sat another piece of his story, his secret cabin. For 30 years, the cabin stood locked and forgotten. Its windows were strangled by vines, its door sealed shut. Locals whispered about it, curious but cautious. It became a kind of legend, a silent monument to a man who had carried so many secrets. When the key was finally found decades later, the truth inside was more shocking than anyone had imagined. Dust-blanketed shelves that still held his personal belongings. Faded photographs captured moments of family, friends, and work. Handwritten letters lay tucked away in drawers. Confessions of private struggles, fears, regrets, and thoughts he never spoke publicly. Some letters spoke of the loneliness he felt even at the height of his fame. Others revealed the pressure he carried, the burden of always being strong for others. For fans who only knew the smiling, heroic Michael Landon, the cabin revealed a man who was far more complex, flawed, vulnerable, and human. A life of contradictions. The cabin symbolized everything Landon was. On the outside, he was a hero, the beloved star of family dramas, the man who brought morality and hope into millions of living rooms. On the inside, he was a child still scarred by his mother's instability, by the humiliation of his bedwetting, by the desperate need to control his world. He was a man who built shows about family while struggling with fidelity and fractured relationships at home. A man who gave the world stories of faith and redemption while wrestling with his own regrets and contradictions. The letters in the cabin didn't diminish him. If anything, they made him more real. They revealed that the strength fans admired on screen was born out of real pain, that his empathy wasn't an act. It came from wounds he carried all his life. Legacy beyond the grave. Michael Landon's death did not end his story. His children carried on his memory, speaking often of his courage and determination. Some pursued acting, others lived quieter lives, but all acknowledged the deep impact he had on them. Fans continued to watch his shows in reruns, streaming them to new generations who discovered the warmth of the Ingalls family or the hope of Jonathan Smith's missions. His semi-autobiographical film, The Loneliest Runner, became even more poignant after his death, a reminder of the boy behind the man. His death also brought renewed attention to pancreatic cancer, a disease often detected too late. Charitable efforts and awareness campaigns carried his name, ensuring that his struggle would help others in the future. The price of greatness today. More than 3 decades after his passing, Michael Landon remains a legend. His shows continue to air. His characters live on in the hearts of fans who grew up watching him. Yet, his legacy is not without shadows. His affair with Cindy Clerico, his fractured friendships, his perfectionism, these are reminders that even the brightest stars are human. The locked cabin, filled with letters of regret and confession, showed that success comes with a price. For Landon, that price was the burden of carrying wounds he could never fully heal. And yet, perhaps that is why his work resonated so deeply. His characters were never perfect. They were strong but flawed, hopeful but tested, moral but human. They reflected his own contradictions, his own struggles, and his own search for redemption. The enduring mystery. The cabin remains a haunting symbol of Michael Landon's life. For years, it stood silent, holding secrets no one dared to uncover. When it was finally opened, it didn't reveal scandal or shame. It revealed humanity. A man who, despite fame and fortune, still battled fears and regrets like anyone else. It is tempting to see Landon as the perfect hero, the flawless father, the angel who brought hope. But the truth is more powerful. He was a man who endured pain, carried scars, made mistakes, and still managed to give the world stories of love, family, and faith. That is his true legacy. The final reflection. Michael Landon once said, "Whatever you want to do it now." There are only so many tomorrows he lived by those words, pouring himself into his work, seizing opportunities, refusing to let fear hold him back. His life was short, just 54 years, but it was filled with creation, passion, and impact. The locked cabin he left behind reminds us that even the greatest legends are human, that behind every smile is a story, behind every show is a struggle, and behind every man is a child who once carried shame, pain, and hope. Michael Landon's life was not perfect, but it was real. And in the end, that reality, flawed, beautiful, and human, is why his story will never be forgotten.